Hey friends, welcome to my channel. I have a baby boy right next to me right now. He's literally in his little lounger making all sorts of noises. Today I just wanted to film a video talking all about my unmedicated birth story with baby number one. A big reason why I wanted to film this video was because I just wanted to spread some positivity and hopefully encourage some of you guys going through pregnancy, and hopefully encourage some of you guys going through pregnancy that want an unmedicated birth, don't really know how to go about it, and just kind of be a positive light in all of it. Just because I feel like once you tell somebody you're pregnant and you want a natural birth, people just have all sorts of opinions about everything birth related. I remember going to one of my first OBGYN appointments and telling them that it was my first pregnancy, that I did want an unmedicated birth, and they were just very quick to be like, well, you never know, and you know, it might be something that you want. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but instead of kind of encouraging me to do the unmedicated birth and going natural and just empowering me in that, they kind of went the other way and were just like, basically just know that it is your first birth, you've never experienced birth before, and therefore you just never know what might happen, which is true. But I think I just needed encouragement in that moment instead of somebody being like, no, you probably won't be able to do it, which is what kind of how it felt to me. And I feel like it's not just with OBGYNs, it's literally with like everybody in your life, especially because like our moms and that generation, it was super normal for them to have all the interventions done. And so if you talk to anybody, I feel like a lot of people just kind of say like they were induced, they got an epidural, and they had their baby. I don't think there's anything wrong with those things. There's a couple of different reasons why I wanted to have an unmedicated birth. One of the biggest reasons was that I know that God has created my body to do this, to carry a baby, to birth a baby, and it's been done for literally centuries, and we didn't always used to have epidurals, and so I just wanted to experience it and see what it was like and allow my body to experience those things. And it was honestly one of the best days of my life. I would even argue like probably the best day ever. Obviously not without a lot of pain and all the things, but it truly was such an empowering experience. And so hopefully this video kind of encourages you guys that are wanting to do this and people are kind of telling you can't or you won't. And then I also wanted to preface everything by saying I think you can have just as much of an empowering birth with an epidural and with an induction. Some other reasons why I wanted to have an unmedicated birth were that I was honestly kind of afraid of some interventions, just because I think there's a whole documentary on the series of interventions that can happen or that can lead to a C-section. It just kind of made me nervous. I like to be in control. I like the idea of being able to feel what was happening and know what was going on, whereas I think if I had gotten an epidural, I wouldn't have been able to know actually what was going on. It was just such a cool experience being able to feel his head come out and his whole body slide out. And also I feel like when you have an unmedicated birth, your partner is just so much more involved because they actually have to provide pressure or kind of help you breathe through certain moments and encourage you. So I also really liked that aspect. There was just so much I really loved about my birth story. I honestly can't say enough good things, and I also wanted to share it now. I'm only a little bit over a week postpartum, and I wanted to share it while it was kind of fresh in my mind. Let's kind of get into the birth story. So I was 37 weeks and 6 days pregnant. I honestly was preparing myself to go for a lot longer just because they say it's your first birth. Usually people will go to term or go late. And so I was kind of preparing my mind and my body to go late just because I started feeling super tired and very large by the time I was 36 weeks. And I was kind of itching for baby to come out at that point. But obviously I wanted to wait until baby was ready. But I was only 37 and 6 when my water broke. It was in the middle of the night. It was probably around 3:30 in the morning. I went to go to the bathroom and I peed, and then I felt like water kind of trickling out of my vagine. And then I thought it was pee, so I mean, it was definitely like a weird feeling, but I couldn't tell if I just couldn't control my bladder or what it was. So I put my underwear back on and I realized that it was soaked. And then I put another pair of underwear on and that one got soaked too. So at that point I switched over to these diapers that my sister-in-law gave me, which ended up being so useful. Definitely get diapers. So I put on the diaper after my underwear got soaked a few times through, and it was clear. Anytime I walked around, I feel like things were trickling out of my body, and it was clear at first, and then it started kind of getting pink. So earlier in the night, I actually feel like I did start having contractions, even though I really couldn't tell, but I was definitely more crampy. Also, I was having prodromal labor for like a whole week before this. So in my head, I was like, oh, maybe it's just another thing of prodromal labor. But it definitely felt a little bit different. And then I went to bed around like 1 in the morning that night. And 2 hours later, my water broke. I was definitely having contractions through all of it. And they weren't super painful, but they were more crampy than my typical prodromal labor contractions were. I kept having contractions through the night. They were uncomfortable enough to where I just could not fall back asleep. So then I just kind of started doing stuff around the house. I did a load of laundry. I started cleaning up the nursery. I was just doing all sorts of things. And throughout my whole pregnancy, I just feel like my husband and I were so busy because we moved into a new house. We actually couldn't move here until November, and I gave birth at the end of December. So I feel like my whole pregnancy was just super busy. I started a new job, we bought a house, we moved into the house, we just had a lot going on, and it just felt like there was a lot to do. And so I started doing things, even though I had texted my doula and she was like, well, try to get sleep, and I really just could not sleep. I was like laying in bed for hours until it was like 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, and I just could not go back to sleep. So then I called the nurse in the morning, probably around 8, and just kind of let her know what was going on. And she had told me that I needed to go in if my water broke. And my birth plan was to stay at home as long as possible and labor at home. And I know once your water breaks, you only have like a 24-hour period before infection becomes a higher risk. But my water had just broken at 3:30. I didn't want to go in yet, especially because the coloring of the water was normal. So I ended up telling the nurse that my midwife had told me that I could labor at home as long as I wanted to, and I didn't want to go in quite yet, and she was totally fine with that. So I stayed at home. I was in contact with my doula the entire time, which, by the way, if you're having an unmedicated birth, highly recommend getting a doula. She was just so helpful and just always had a lot of good tips and really just educated us on a few things that we didn't consider before, and was so helpful throughout the whole laboring process for me. It was just so amazing to have her. Seriously, it was such a game changer, and I really don't know if I could have done it without her, and my husband would say the same thing. So definitely get a doula. So anyway, I labored at home until probably about 3 in the afternoon. My midwife had called me earlier in the afternoon, just kind of saying, hey, we actually haven't done a GBS swab on you, and your water would have been broken for quite a long time. So if you just want to head in probably sometime around 3 or 3:30, that would be great. At that point, my contractions had progressed a ton. I was doing like lunges around the house. I was on my birth ball. I was kind of all over the place, doing things to kind of distract myself. My husband went and got groceries. He got us a bunch of snacks for the hospital. Just started doing things around the house that we needed done, and I feel like that was really good for me to distract myself. And I also took a really hot shower, which was honestly the best part of my day, because when contractions got more painful, the hot shower just really helped. I feel like it kind of helped to just like distract me from the pain. I don't know, it was probably like one of the highlights of the day. By the time it hit around like 2:30ish in the afternoon, my contractions started to be about 2 to 3 minutes apart, and just really painful, to the point where I had to stop everything I was doing and just work through my contractions. We live about 35 minutes away from the hospital that I was gonna give birth at, so it was gonna be a drive anyway. So at that point, I was fine with going in, and it would have been right around the exact time that my midwife would have wanted me to go in. We probably got there around 3:15ish, and we were actually stuck in triage for a really long time. The labor and delivery unit was super hectic. I think we heard the code alarm go off twice, which is so scary, and I pray that those women are okay, or those babies. It was super hectic, so we actually were in triage for probably like 2 or 3 hours, which my doula said has never happened to her before, and was kind of crazy that happened to me. Even waiting for a triage room took forever. I feel like it took like 20 to 30 minutes. And she said usually when a woman is in labor, like, they try to get you in right away. Part of me kind of feels like they didn't take it that seriously, because I had a very uncomplicated pregnancy, and it was my first pregnancy, so I don't think they expected me to progress as fast, if that makes sense. I feel like triage can be uncomfortable just because they don't really know your birth plan. They're kind of doing everything by protocol. The room was really small. We also had like all of our stuff with us in a very small room. It was my doula, my husband, and me, and like all of our hospital bags and stuff, and we were just kind of sitting in there for a long time. I was working through all my contractions, which were getting more and more painful. Then I also at that point got my cervix checked, which I definitely did not want to get a ton of cervical checks, just because I feel like it would have messed with my head a lot, and I was honestly really nervous that I would only be like 2 or 3 centimeters dilated, even though my contractions were super close together and very painful at that point. I really get in my head about some things, and I feel like I would have gotten really discouraged, and so I wanted to wait as long as I could. And my doula was kind of like, well, I feel like your contractions are close enough together. She also said that it would be good to kind of get a baseline of where I was at to give them an idea, and it might even make the process go faster to get an actual room. So they had the midwife come in and check my cervix, and I was 5 centimeters dilated, around 4-ish, and that was actually really exciting. I was -1 station, and I can't remember how effaced I was, but my doula said I was doing a really good job and that 5 centimeters was really great. At that point it was only 4, and we didn't probably go into our room until 6 or 7. After being in triage, we finally got a room with a tub. So at the hospital I was giving birth at, not all the room had tubs, and I really wanted to have a tub just so I could see if I wanted to have a water birth. I was super open to having a water birth. I actually ended up just kind of getting overheated when I was in the tub and needed to get out, and then ended up giving birth like an hour later. But I just wanted to have a tub, especially since I like my shower so much. I feel like the water would really help. Anyway, they said that they did have a room with a tub, which was really exciting, and the room that I actually ended up giving birth in was huge. The tub was big, they had a shower. It was just really nice. And by the time we got to the room, my contractions were bearable but very painful. And also during my cervical check, they had told me that his head was kind of in a wonky position, and so my doula was helping me do all these different positions to kind of get his head in the right place. So we get to the room. I labored in the shower for a few minutes. My doula got my tub ready for me, and she was just so helpful because she also got a whole bucket of ice and washcloths in case I did get overheated, and all these things I did not have to ask her to do. She just kind of did them, which was really nice. And so then my husband could really just focus on me and providing a ton of counter pressure and just encouraging me. My doula also provided me with so much counter pressure because the way that he was positioned, I had a ton of really painful back labor, which is not fun. Probably the most painful part about my labor was my back. And the whole time, because he was so low, I felt like I just had so much pressure. Like I felt like I had to poop the entire time. I also work night shift as a nurse. I had worked that night before I went into labor, and so I really hadn't gotten that much sleep in the last like 48 hours at this point, because usually after my last night shift I don't like to sleep the whole day. I like to sleep like half the time and then kind of adjust back to a normal schedule. I was going to use the night that I went into labor to actually sleep in and get a full night's rest, but obviously I went into labor at like 3 in the morning, so I never actually got that rest, and so I was pretty exhausted. Anyway, so I labored in the tub for a while, and then when I got out of the tub, I did another cervical check because I felt like I was in a ton of pain, and my doula had told me if I felt any vaginal pressure or a ton of rectal pressure to let her know. That just means like things are progressing, things are changing. And I did feel like there was a lot more pressure lower, and so we did another cervical check, and honestly, I was a little bit discouraged because I was only at 7 centimeters at that point. I think because I was experiencing so much back labor and so much pain, I was just like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this for another 2 or 3 hours or more. And it had been probably only like 2 or 3 hours since the last cervical check. Actually, yeah, probably like 3 hours since the last cervical check. I feel like when you're in labor, you're kind of just in a deep fog. But it makes sense why I was only at 7. I think I just felt like things were progressing a lot faster because of how much pain I was in. Also at that point, I was relying so much on my husband and my doula to give me counter pressure because my back was hurting so bad. And if they weren't there, I would literally have so much anxiety because I would be like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be so painful. I can't do it without them giving me counter pressure. And there was at one point where one of them had to stand on each side of me and like literally put all their weight into my back because I was in so much pain. A lot of how I labored was on all fours. I think because he was -1 station, there was so much pressure down there that if I was sitting or laying or anything like that, I just felt so uncomfortable. I labored on all fours on the way to the hospital. Also, the car ride was definitely the worst part. Just not a good time. And I think Google Maps told him to drive like the local way instead of using the interstate, which would have been faster, and I was just so annoyed. Also, something else that was really helpful during my birth was the Christian hypnobirthing podcast. I really liked that because I feel like it was just very encouraging, a constant reminder that your body was made to do this, that God created you for this, that this baby was meant for you and to come out of you, and you were meant to carry this baby, you were meant to birth this baby. And so it was just so encouraging. And I feel like that's what kind of really got me through that whole end of labor. After they checked me and I was 7 centimeters, the midwife still said that his head was in a weird position. And so my doula had me do this side lying position, which was literally the most painful thing ever. The contractions were just so awful in that position. And I think that was the only time where I was like, I really wish I had an epidural right now. But aside from that, I never really thought to myself, like, I need an epidural, you know? I think especially because at that point I had labored for so long and I had been in so much pain, I would have felt like all of it was for no reason if I had gotten an epidural. After she made me do those side-lying positions, it was pretty quick after that that I actually gave birth. So I'm super grateful. Even though they were super, super painful, I feel super grateful because she obviously knows what she's doing, and baby came very shortly after. So I actually ended up giving birth on the bed on all fours. I got out of the tub because I was overheating. I was planning on getting back in and hoping to do a water birth, but I think at that point I was in so much pain that once I got on the bed and I was on all fours, I was not moving. Like, I was not moving at that point. I was gonna get another cervical check around 9. The midwife came in and she was just like, oh, like, this girl's about to have her baby. I don't know if it's just unmedicated births that you experience this, or if you also experience this with an epidural, but towards the end, literally, like, something just possesses you and you just cannot not push. Like, no matter what happens, like, your body just instinctively, like, pushes. And I just remember apologizing so many times because you're not technically supposed to push until you're 10 centimeters, and the midwife was going to check me again to see if I was at 10, but she didn't end up checking me because I guess there are kind of telltale signs of when somebody is about to have their baby, and so I guess they could tell that I was like ready to have my baby. At that point I was like pushing, and everybody was encouraging me, like, the midwife was in the room. I guess she had gotten all her stuff on. This is what my husband told me. She had gotten all her stuff on, like her gloves and everything, and she was like ready for the baby to come out. My husband said I probably only pushed for about 15 minutes, but it felt like a lot longer. The hardest part was definitely the head, and the ring of fire is real, but literally once the head comes out, the whole rest of baby's body just kind of slippery slides out. I don't know, pushing was definitely the most painful part, but also like the most rewarding and satisfying part, because once baby comes out, it's like this huge relief. It was amazing. And also, this is so weird, but when you look down at your stomach, you could kind of see it like emptying, like baby was like clearly descending. That was just very satisfying. I was honestly kind of scared to have the placenta come out too, but honestly, that was really satisfying too. It just kind of slid out and really didn't feel like a lot. It was like some pressure and then just kind of came out. And I really had minimal tearing, which I was so grateful for. She said she couldn't even call it a 1-degree tear because it was so small and it was on my labia. And she said that she didn't really know how to categorize it because it definitely was a tear, but it wasn't anything deep. And really, she said she could have gotten away with not repairing it, but aesthetically, she was kind of just like, I would if I were you. And my doula kind of said the same thing. So they did end up repairing it. And that was probably the worst part. I got to hold my baby right away, skin to skin. That was amazing. Just like the most surreal moment ever. And I just remember when they said they wanted to repair that area, I was nervous about holding the baby because of all the adrenaline. I was feeling super shaky, and I don't know, I was just nervous that I was going to drop the baby. So I ended up having my husband Chad hold the baby while I got repaired. And the worst part really was just the injection, but I don't know why I was more afraid of them repairing me than actual birth. I think it's just because you go through all of this and you kind of think it's all over, and then it's not. Like, you still have to get repaired, you still have all the stuff that you need to do, and it just felt like a lot of work, honestly. I honestly think the cramping afterwards was more painful than some of those contractions. And I don't think it's because it was actually more painful. I just think that because labor and contractions actually lead to something happening, whereas cramps afterwards just hurt and nothing's coming from it, you know what I mean? So the OB ended up stitching me up, and I loved her so much. She was so encouraging and just really only had positive things to say. She was just so kind and made me feel so comfortable throughout the whole process. And I'm so grateful for everyone that was at my birth. My nurse that I had, she was precepting someone, and that nurse was amazing too. I just overall had a really, really great experience, and I'm just so thankful for everybody that was a part of it. It was very clear that God had orchestrated my birth to be exactly how it was, and it was literally perfect, and everything that I would have wanted, everything that I would have dreamed of, and I literally could not be more grateful. So I think I'll make a whole video on just kind of how I prepared for my birth, because preparing for an unmedicated birth is no joke. I feel like you really just have to educate yourself and mentally and physically prepare yourself. There was a lot more that I wish I would have done, but I feel like everything kind of happened all according to God's timing, and it really could not have been more perfect. So anyway, I hope my story encourages you guys, especially those of you guys that are considering doing an unmedicated birth or are unsure about it. It really was one of the best things that I have ever done. It was so empowering, and also my recovery process was not bad at all. Like, I'm a week and a half postpartum and I feel pretty much back to normal, so that's been amazing. Also, I just wanted to add, I am so sorry. I feel like a lot of this video was kind of confusing and hard to follow, and clearly I have really bad brain fog, really bad mom brain, and have not been getting any sleep. So if you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments. I feel like there's a lot that I forgot to cover. If you guys want a second part to it, let me know. But thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.